Lots to get to in terms of, I guess, the legalities behind condos and boards and proxies, board meetings, owners meetings, AGMs, all that stuff, and delving into it with us, Denise Lash of Lash Condo Law. Denise, how are you? Welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your firm and how you started it up? Because I understand you were with some big Bay Street firms first and you got into this. Why did you get into the condo side of things?
Exactly. Well, I've been practicing condominium law for over 25 years. And as you said, it's some very large law firms. A couple of years ago, I decided, you know what, it's time to take my team and sort of to cater to the unique needs of condominium corporations. So I bought a condominium unit in downtown Toronto, and we all moved into a small space. We've got our entire team, and we practice condo law. And each one of us are either condo owners or condo directors. I'm a director of that condo corporation.
Wow. No shortage of business, I bet, with all these condos popping up.
Yeah, it's happening every day.
Yeah, it's wild. So obviously with condominiums comes condo boards and, of course, the property management companies. And when it comes to boards and selecting board members and holding AGMs, it is a crazy process, I'm sure, a very intricate one. And Joe, what specifically do you think is important to touch on when it comes to holding some of these board meetings, the AGMs, and that sort of thing?
Well, in today's show, we want to discuss holding proper board meetings, carrying out the duties of not only the board of directors, but also the property management company, the different fiduciary responsibilities that a board has towards all their owners. Ultimately, they're the voice of their respective owners. So in today's show, Denise and I will be talking about best practices as far as holding board meetings. What should the board be doing? What should management be doing in the form of ensuring that the day-to-day operations are carried through?
Why don't we start there then, Denise? In terms of board meetings, how can they be called, and who has to do that? Who sits on these boards?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to mention that I think one of the problems we're seeing is that we have legislation called the Condominium Act, and the Condominium Act doesn't contain all the details. So how do you conduct meetings? If you have minutes, what are minutes supposed to contain? That's always a common question. How much do I put down in a minutes, and how should they say every word? There's no governing documentation that deals with board meetings. So it's really up to the board to establish the procedures. There are bylaws that can be passed, and usually developers will have that initial governing bylaw, which will talk about when you call board meetings, how much notice you need to be given. So it's a bit of a challenge, and I think that's where management comes in to guide the board. Mm-hmm. Board meetings shouldn't take all evenings, and sometimes they go past 12 midnight. They really should be done in, I don't know, Joe, what do you think, like 2 hours at the most?
At the very most, board meetings shouldn't exceed 2 hours, provided all the information is given to the board well in advance of the meeting, and that information is prepared by property management. And today, with the technology that's at hand, all the information is available instantaneously to all the boards. It's a matter of a board member taking a few minutes of their day to read an email, get familiarized with whatever issues at hand. And so by the time they come to the board meeting, they've got a complete package. They've been kept up to date throughout the whole month leading to the meeting. And so when it comes time to getting together, the board just makes their decisions, and management's role is to carry out those directions.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem is where do you draw that line? I see a lot of boards in my practice that really are doing the job of a property manager. They may come directly to me as a lawyer, and I sometimes say, well, you should be dealing with your property manager. Otherwise, legal fees are going to get out of control, which often happens. So it's not to micromanage, really let the manager do their job.
And that's a very good point, Denise. All too often, board members tend to feel that it's their responsibility to administer the, the day-to-day condominium. Excuse me. That's the role of the property management company and the property manager. That's why it's so critical for all board members to hire the best possible property management company and property manager to make their jobs easier in making the right decisions, being educated, because we can't expect that all board members will be plumbers and electricians and engineers and accountants. So it's the role of a competent property manager and their support, the company that supports them, to be able to educate the board and assist them in making the right decisions.
Yeah, could we talk about education?
Yeah, well, we've got to take a quick break. Why don't we save that for the other side?
Sure.
But again, if you want to get a hold of Joe, as he mentioned, and you do need a really good property management company, VeroMGMT.com is the website to check out. You can give him a ring, 905-696-VERO, or email the man directly, joe@VeroMGMT.com. When we come back on the other side, we will talk about education. Denise Lash of Lash Condo Law is in studio with us, lashcondolaw.com. Hit that up as well. We're back on the other side when the Condominium Report returns here on Talk Radio AM640. We're back. It is the Condominium Report with Joe Vero of Vero Property Management. You can email him at joe@veromgmt.com. Our guest in studio, Denise Lash of Lash Condo Law. We've touched on a few things prior to the break, most notably board meetings, but I understand in terms of education, new legislation, Denise, being tabled very shortly in terms of directors' education. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's new legislation coming in as early as July this year, possibly, and we're all getting ready for it because it's going to double in size from what we have right now, introducing hundreds of regulations. There's also going to be manager licensing, so that's sort of a separate piece of legislation. It's called the Protecting Condominium Owners Act, and there's a requirement now for boards of directors to have certain level of education, which we think is good. I'm not sure what Joe thinks, how much is enough. There are nonprofit organizations out there that will assist with this. One of the organizations I just want to mention is a new one that has come to Canada called CAI, Community Associations Institute, CAICanada.com, if any of the listeners are interested in seeing that site, because it has a lot of resources for directors, for managers, for business people in the industry. So
would they have to have this education prior to being elected to the board? Is that how that would work?
No, there's a phase-in.
I see.
So, and that's something that will be in our regulations to that new piece of legislation.
Okay.
And something that now, I guess, as management, they have to put it in the budgets. Because now we have this mandatory education and all kinds of other things.
On top of that, the cost of running this new bureau is going to be included in the common element fees, where each individual unit owner is going to have to contribute towards. But getting back to the education, Denise, how much education will be required, and what is the process as far as a board member obtaining or meeting the requirements of the reforms?
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty straightforward. I just don't think it's going to be enough. I think the government's going in on the right path and trying to educate not just directors, but there will also be mandatory condominium owners' guides and purchasers' guides. So these are all working towards educating the consumer to make the condo owner more educated so that they know what to do and what not to do in a condominium. And also for the directors, just sort of a minimum amount of education. I think over time this will change, because I'm just not sure 3, 6, 10 hours of condominium courses will be enough for directors.
And that's fair. And one of the things that we harp on and we can't over stress is a well-versed board is a good board, and it's our job as property managers to educate our respective boards of directors, because ultimately it makes our job a lot easier, but it also makes for a better community.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Joe, because I've heard from some other managers that say, you know what, I'm not sure education is good for directors. A little bit of education could be a dangerous thing. So
And you also think maybe it may limit the amount of people wanting to sit on a board if they know they have to go through this. Because a lot of people, they can just kick their feet up and I'm a director, right? They don't have to do anything. But now, given this added responsibility, would it limit the amount of people that could potentially sit as a director?
Yeah, I think that what we've been doing over the course of a number of years is we've been updating bylaws. So we had a new legislation in 2011, which allowed us to do bylaws. And in those bylaws, we often put in that directors need to take certain courses and get that education. So I think in some condominiums, they've already done that. But now it will be mandated for every single condo. And you're right. It's not just the education, but it's the liability.
Yep.
Because there have been some case decisions out there where directors have been held personally liable. So that's something that if you're going to be on the board, you take the job seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's time consuming, isn't it?
It could be time consuming. It all comes down to how much time does an individual person want to dedicate towards her community. At the end of the day, it's a voluntary position, and everybody should focus on the good of the community and not necessarily what's in it for me.
Exactly.
As far as education, my understanding. At the beginning, it's going to be fairly simple. Video watch. You're going to watch a video over the internet. There's associations like the Canadian Condominium Institute that does offer directors courses, and there's also the association that Denise alluded to. CAI, which also offers courses for directors. And again, it's our philosophy that a good board is an educated board and a strong board. And meetings do run quicker when everybody's on the same page.
I've sat at some lengthy meetings before.
Yeah, but I think part of the problem, and we were discussing this earlier, Joe, is that directors sometimes don't rely on professional advice. Or a manager may say, you know what, I think you need to contact the engineer. I think you need to contact the lawyer. And some boards refuse to do so.
It's with the old adage, what is it, a penny wise, pound foolish? A professional will not only help save the corporation tens of thousands of dollars, but it will keep the corporation and the board out of litigation and trouble down the road.
We got to take a quick break here, guys. When we come back, though, I know we want to get into some of the owners' meetings and AGMs and a whole lot more here. Again, our guest in studio on the Condominium Report is Denise Lash of Lash Condo Law. Lots to get to when the Condominium Report with Joe Vero of Vero Property Management returns here on Talk Radio AM640. It's Talk Radio AM640. Jamie Tweel alongside Joe Vero of Vero Property Management. It is the Condominium Report, www.veromgmt.com or email joe@veromgmt.com. Our guest in studio, Denise Lash of Lash Condo Law. Website is lashcondolaw.com. Easy as that. Go check it out. Owners meetings and AGMs, all that stuff. Lots to get to, guys. We've covered a lot, but when it comes to these meetings, what is it that people really need to know?
Well, Jamie, this time of year, I usually attend about 3 to 4 owners meetings a week, I should say. I wish it was a month. It's per week. And most of the meetings go without any problems. But there's always, that odd meeting where there might be some acrimony between a homeowners group and a board of directors. And it's our job as property managers to keep the meetings as civil as possible. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, the disgruntled homeowners have questions. And it's important not only for the board but for management to address any of their concerns in a way that makes sense to the entire community. Sometimes you can't give them the answer that they want. And hopefully, our job is to create a dialogue, but a positive dialogue, and not just fluff off, an owner's concern.
So I think can I jump in
Sure,
here? Okay.
absolutely.
I think part of the challenge is that we're dealing with a community of people, and we've got a corporation, which is like a business corporation, and we try to combine the two. And it's really difficult to know sometimes, depending on your community, which way to go. In order to get these meetings done in a timely fashion and not get out of control, because sometimes they do, the odd one, it really is important to have a good chair and to know ahead of time and to establish a procedure at the outset of the meeting. So I think that's the first thing, because then everybody knows their role. Owners really want to jump in and say, what kinds of issues they have. And I think you need to let owners be heard, but there's a time in which they can do that, which is under other business at the end of the meeting. Get through the business of the meeting first, then tell the owners, you'll have your opportunity. And try to keep control, but to respect one another. Because that's always a problem. I know, Joe, you've told me about situations you've had.
Some meetings, unfortunately, do become confrontational between different owners groups and boards, and it's important just to keep civility in place and just remind everyone that we're all working together to make a better community. In some of these meetings where there is tension or acrimony or individuals wishing to remove certain board members for whatever the reason, the current legislation and the reforms to the legislation allows individuals to obtain proxies. There's certain concerns that I have when it relates to proxies.
For those who don't know what proxies are, Joe.
A proxy is a document that an individual owner hands to another individual to attend a meeting in their place and potentially vote on their behalf, speak on their behalf. The proxies are also used for quorum purposes. All too often, we encounter meetings where we're not able to establish quorum requirements, and that's 25% of the units being present in person or by proxy. Using the proxy for the purpose of a quorum, I'm totally in favor of. Where I have certain concerns is when proxies become misused by individuals, and we found at times where a lot of these proxies are also fraudulently obtained. And for example, Mr. Smith it wasn't the person who signed this proxy, although he's a registered owner of the unit, and that proxy was forged. It's difficult for the person who's registering the proxy to be able to validate whether or not, yes, this is Mr. Smith's signature, and yes, in fact, he gave this proxy to the individual unit owner. So it does open cause for concern.
It's not only fraud. I think that in certain instances, people may knock on other doors to get the proxies, and they may give misinformation, say, you need to give me your proxy because your common expenses are going to go up, and if you don't want them to go up, sign here. So we have a lot of those things going on. We call it the battle of the proxies.
And there's room for a lot of misuse. So as managers, we're constantly having to do our due diligence in a limited period of time. Usually a meeting is called for 7:30, registration is called for 7 o'clock. So in 30 minutes, we're trying to register potentially hundreds of proxies, and we're trying to validate which ones are valid proxies versus those that may not be valid proxies and may in fact be fraudulent proxies.
That's a problem. I've got to say, when you said 7 o'clock registration, you need to start your registration at 5 o'clock.
In some of these larger communities, that's what we're starting to do.
Because people get pissed off when they're waiting and the meeting doesn't start on time.
Yes. And it's our responsibility to make sure those meetings do start on time and end on time.
Anything else, guys, in terms of proxies you want to touch on? We've got about 30 seconds or so before the break.
Well, with respects to proxies, I think we've covered some of the concerns that we have.
Online proxies?
There's more and more individuals that are living abroad that are emailing or faxing their proxies over. It's always nice to have an original signature to be able to compare to an actual signature that we may have on file. What is also prudent to do, and we've done this before, when we know there's going to be a contentious election or removal of a board of directors, we will actually bring the unit files. And if we see a signature that just doesn't look right or the name just wasn't spelled correctly, we will compare it to what's in the unit file and compare it to the signature that we have on record. And that does assist us in saying that this signature doesn't match a signature that we have on file, and therefore it won't be counted. Mm-hmm. But that does add to a lot of time that it takes to register these
I see a
proxies.
problem with that too, because as managers or lawyers, we're really not handwriting specialist experts, and trying to determine whether someone signed it or not is very difficult. So what we normally do, and when I'm sort of looking after this, we just take the proxy. If there's only one proxy, unless somebody brings us to our attention that there may be fraud, we accept it. We don't normally compare the signature. And I think that's what you're saying. It's only if it's contentious.
It's only if it's contentious or two or three people come with the same proxy with different signatures.
Then we become handwriting experts, right?
Then we're trying to validate which of these three proxies is the right proxy.
We got to take a break, guys. Awesome stuff, though. We got lots more to get to here when the Condominium Report with Joe Vero of Vero Property Management returns. You're listening to Talk Radio AM 640. It's the Condominium Report with Joe Vero of Vero Property Management. Running out of time, we've covered a lot, and we got a lot to get to yet. Denise Lash is our guest in studio of Lash Condo Law. And prior to the break, and even off the air, guys, we were talking about owners' meetings and AGMs, some of which can oftentimes get a little out of control. Denise, anything jump to mind? I'm sure some of our listeners can relate.
Yeah. Well, over 25 years, you can imagine, right? Mm-hmm. And they're different condominiums. Sometimes you think that a higher-end condominium people will be more civil, but that's not the case.
The contrary?
I'm not going to tell you which one, but I was quite surprised where many of the unit owners were lawyers and judges. Sometimes they can be the worst owners.
Wow.
So we've had some violent situations, police, dogs, and I'm sure Joe has his stories and instances of those kinds of things.
Over 33 years, can't imagine how many meetings I've attended, but it's got to be well over 1,000. And most meetings are civil, very respectful. But yeah, from time to time, there are meetings where people have to be ejected from the meeting room. And sometimes when they don't go on their own accord, we've had to call the police and have the individual escorted. We've also had meetings where if we suspect there's going to be trouble, for a better word, we've had to hire paid duty officers or security personnel just to ensure that everybody's safety is protected and no one gets out of hand. Because the last thing we want is someone to get hurt at a meeting. Disputes will arise, and 99% of the time, disputes can be diffused by calming the situation down. There's that 1% that does get out of hand, and regardless what we do, someone wants to do something that is not called for.
Yeah.
Inappropriate, that's
right.
correct.
And obviously there's not just, sometimes dissension amongst the ranks in terms of the residents, but also on the board as well. So in looking at removal of board members or boards or any changes in that regard, Denise, maybe you can touch on that and some of the complications that might be involved there.
Yeah, I have. I just want to mention I have an interesting one that I'm going to on Thursday night, and it was a situation in which there are 3 board members, and the board president was disqualified off the board. That no one didn't know over the past couple of years that he didn't meet the qualifications, so he was disqualified. The other director, I think, got a little frustrated, and so he resigned, and so there was one director left. So now you've got one director operating a condominium corporation, and you can't. So there always has to be a quorum, which is usually if there are 5, there's got to be 2 out of 5. So we've had to call a meeting this Thursday to elect an entire new board because the last remaining director has put their name forward. So the community wants to elect their entire board.
Now, tell me what are the qualifications or disqualifications of a board member?
Well, I think you've got the Condominium Act, which has a very minimum qualifications, which is you have to be a minimum of 18 years of age. You can't be an undischarged bankrupt. And you have to be considered under the Substitute Decisions Act, competent. So those are the minimum, but I think that a lot of condominiums have done bylaws, and I mentioned since 2001 a lot are doing new bylaws that put in other qualifications. And those are, and I don't know what you've seen in your bylaws, no criminal record. Whether that should be the case or not. So bylaws can put in other qualifications. What I think is important are things like attending board meetings. So if a director fails to attend a certain number of board meetings, they should be disqualified. You have a situation where someone is eager to be on the board and then they never show up to a meeting. Mm-hmm. You can't get a board member off unless there's a disqualification or unless the owners requisition and remove that director.
And we've had several over the years, directors that are very eager to get on the board. Maybe they have an agenda to get on the board, and once they realize that they can't pass their agenda, they just don't show up, and it makes it difficult for the remaining board members to be able to carry on business as usual when there's 1 or 2 directors that don't show up, or when they do show up after an absence of 3-4 meetings, everything has to be recapped, and then they want to vote on something that was voted on months earlier. So that makes it very difficult to carry business. As far as the removal of board of directors, what are the requirements? Should an owners group or decide to remove a board member?
So there's something called a requisition. It's in the Condominium Act, and that owner needs to solicit 15% of all the unit owners in the condominium, and they have to be unit owners. They can't be tenants. They have to be the registered unit owners, and they can't be in arrears of their common expenses. Otherwise, they don't count towards that 15%. That's what you need to fill out. There's a form that is unfortunately not in our current Condominium Act, so it has to contain certain information, have to state the reasons why you want the person removed and who you're removing.
15% seems pretty low, no?
Well, that's just to call the meeting.
Just
then
to call
once
it.
that's given to the board of directors or property management, whatever the address for the corporation is, then the meeting is called. You need a quorum, which Joe mentioned before, which is at least 25%. You need 50%, more than 50%, to remove a director off the board. That's 50% of all the units in the condominium. So a 300-unit building, you need 151 to remove.
We're running out of time. We got to take another break here. Tom's waving frantically at me. So we'll do that, and when we come back, we'll wrap things up here when the Condominium Report with Joe Vero of Vero Property Management returns. Our guest in studio, Denise Lash of Lash Condo Law. We're back after this. Just enough time to wrap things up here on the Condominium Report with Joe Vero of Vero Property Management. And again, it's been an absolute pleasure to have Denise Lash in studio with us here. She's had some fantastic points. We've had some great discussions. And Denise, well, I'll give you a chance, maybe just tell a little bit of people about what you do and how they can find your services online.
Well, I'm a condominium lawyer. We're very busy these days representing condominium corporations. There's a lot of information on my lashcondolaw.com site. There's a blog, and every week I write something interesting, so sign up. You can subscribe on the blog. And I also want to mention CAI Canada. That's a great resource. And anyone want information can go on to the caicanada.com site or email hello@caicanada.com.
Excellent stuff. And of course, Joe Vero, we've been saying it throughout the show, VeroMGMT.com is the website to check out. And on there, we mentioned this at the top of the show, Joe, the Vero Advantage booklet. Maybe give us another synopsis of that, how people can get their hands on it.
Well, we encourage all the listeners to call me at 416-578-VERO. That's 8376. Or visit our website at www.veromgmt.com. Or send me an email at joe@veromgmt.ca. I'll be more than pleased to send you our Vero Advantage booklet. There's a lot of interesting facts as to running a better condominium. And we also encourage that you invite me to any of your board meetings or homeowners meetings where we can talk to you about the Vero Advantage and things that you should be aware of with respect to the reforms to the legislation, better building practices. These are things that we commonly do, not only to our clients, but we are available to any board and to any homeowners group.
The events calendar as well. I know you wanted to touch on that.
That's correct. The events calendar is a detailed calendar of all the preventative maintenance checklists that not only should a board be aware of for a high-rise building, but we also have one for townhomes and by going through the checklist, you ensure that your property is well maintained and nothing gets left behind.
Excellent stuff as always. Denise, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure being here. Thank you.
You got it. All right, that does it for us. The Condominium Report with Joe Vero will be back again next month, of course, as always. Lots to get to as the condos continue to go up like weeds here in Toronto. So stay tuned every month here on Talk Radio AM640. It's the Condominium Report with Joe Vero, Vero Property Management.